There are a bunch of major headlines coming out of the White House tonight after President Trump signed a series of proclamations behind closed doors. That includes a sweeping travel ban on 12 countries with a partial restriction on 7 others that we just mentioned, reintroducing a controversial step that he took early in his first term with some differences this time tonight. What we are reading in this proclamation is this takes effect at midnight, 5 days from now on June 9th, and it bans travel to the United States from Afghanistan, Myanmar, Chad, the Republic of the Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Haiti, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen. This also comes as the president signed a proclamation suspending international visas for new students at Harvard as he is trying to block foreign students from enrolling at the university. My sources are here in the newsroom on this breaking news. CNN's Priscilla Alvarez, the New York Times' David Sanger, along with former federal prosecutor Shan Wu. Priscilla, let's start with you just in terms of the differences in the travel ban we saw in term one and what we're seeing now.
Well, there are quite a bit of similarities as well as some glaring differences, particularly with the inclusion of Afghanistan. But this is something that President Trump has been telegraphing since day one. It's also something that I'm told has been an ongoing discussion and deliberation within this administration. And they felt quite empowered because, as a reminder, in the first term, the Supreme Court eventually did essentially okay a version of the travel ban, saying that the administration had broad discretion. The president specifically had broad discretion when it comes to limiting the entry of certain non-citizens. Now, as far as the similarities, in that iteration that was eventually approved or okayed by the Supreme Court, Somalia, Yemen, Libya, Chad, Iran, those were in that iteration.
Yeah.
Afghanistan, it wasn't. Cuba and Venezuela, similarly, weren't. That is going to matter moving forward, particularly in Republican politics and in Florida. But the basis of this has been for this administration, both the first term and now, the screening and the vetting, and that these countries do not provide sufficient screening and vetting. Therefore, they are limiting the entry. But this is certainly a blow to those non-citizens from those countries.
Yeah, and David, as I was reading through this earlier, essentially what the president is saying here is that he can take some of these countries off if he changes their mind or changes, the bar that they've set for the vetting, and he can also add other countries. And basically is arguing this came after a review by the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio.
This was done, I think, in a much more skillful way than they did with the original, the so-called Muslim ban at the time, because what he's arguing here is state failure makes it impossible for the United States to judge the backgrounds of people who have applied for visas. And what he doesn't do, of course, is lay out the standard that they must meet in order to get past that list. And, it's sort of we'll know it when we see it. And you've seen him do this a number of times in different ways, in different orders in recent times, where he's designing it to give himself the maximum discretion and making the argument to the courts that this is within the president's authority. This is sort of an executive branch decision.
Yeah. Shan, legally, how are you looking at this tonight?
I think if we go back to the original Trump 1 ban, as Priscilla was talking about, the Supreme Court gave the president the raw power to do this. The factual predicate here, I think, is really poor. I mean, he talks about the Boulder, Colorado suspect whose country is actually not on the banned list. He also has some kind of silly things, I think, which says, for example, some of the countries that face the bans or partial restrictions are people who have a higher percentage of people overstaying visas. I mean, how is a country supposed to screen for that? What's that got to do with anything? Individual people choose to overstay it. But
are you saying that's more of a responsibility of the United States?
Absolutely. In fact, I would argue most of this is responsibility of the United States to take care of problems overstaying within the U.S. And if they have information that particular people may have ties to terrorist groups, I mean, that's, again, something they need to look at. I think it's overbroad, but again, I think the president has been given the raw legal power to do this, but there'll certainly be legal challenges. I think at the end of the day, when it reaches the Supreme Court, probably on the emergency docket basis, I think they're still going to uphold it.
Yeah, and I think the rollout, we're also seeing the differences in, as I call it, round one and round two, because round one, it came out very quickly. People were left at airports, freaking out over, what this meant for them then. This seems to obviously be rolled out in a much different way, much later on in his term. What have the deliberations been like? I mean, since a lot of the people who are working in the Department of Homeland Security and in the West Wing, Stephen Miller and company, were here for that first time.
Well, carefully crafted. I had talked to a source about this when the deliberations were ongoing, and they said they learned their lesson. Remember, when the president came into office this January, one of the first questions I asked, is the travel ban going to come out as swiftly as it did in the first term? And that was the response that I got, because they did want to craft this carefully. This has already gone to the Supreme Court. They knew what discretion and authority they had. I think something to watch out for here, Caitlin, is how this evolves, because it leaves, to your point, an opportunity for countries to be added or not. And one of the big priorities for this administration, particularly on immigration, is which of these countries is not taking their citizens back when they're trying to deport them. Which one of these do they want to work with to send other migrants there? Remember, they try to do that with South Sudan. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays into this equation moving forward.
In terms of like even making a deal, basically,
Right.
and how we've seen play out with the tariffs. David, also on Harvard tonight, this is a big move that the president is taking, trying to essentially fulfill his effort to block Harvard from being able to enroll international students. You're an alum of the school, but I just wonder, from your reporting, what you take away from this proclamation tonight.
So he telegraphed that this was coming, and a good number of Harvard students, as a good number of students at a lot of major universities, are foreign-born. I also teach there. I teach national security, and I can tell you that in the class that we teach, we have a lot of foreigners, and it vastly enriches the classroom experience. You wouldn't want to talk about national security issues only among Americans and not get different perspectives and pushback on these issues. I don't think the president is really focused on that. I think he is at this point very determined to go punish Harvard for standing up to him. And this is going to be the defining struggle, I think, with the academic world.
Well, and Shan, people might look at this and say, well, whoa, didn't a court just block him from blocking the school from enrolling international students? But he seems to be citing a different authority in this proclamation tonight, instead talking about national security.
Yeah, I think that's mostly just him talking about national security, trying a different tactic. I think the Harvard ban is likely to fail because there's just no basis for singling out Harvard in particular. If there is evidence that particular students have ties or they've done something criminally wrong, that's something they can zero in on, but not really. I mean, there's allusions to that kind of evidence supposedly, but really haven't seen that yet. And that's where the courts are going to look to see, is there any factual basis for this, or is he just sort of continuing his vendetta against Harvard?
Yeah, and we'll see how the courts respond to this. Thank you all for that reporting and that insight.